keep him in the pocket and a guy that can certainly take off and run when needed, but he's improved as a passer. I believe he's third in the ACC. He's rated very high when it comes to PFF rankings in terms of NFL prospects. So Jordan Travis is going to be a problem for Syracuse this week, right? No question about that. He's a great running back. However, Syracuse has struggled to stop the run the past couple of weeks. 700 yards in the last 3 games. But see, Jim says it here too. Syracuse is a pretty good running back if only we use him. My colleague Emily Leiker did a spectacular feature this week on Sean Tucker and kind of put into context numbers-wise what we've all seen this year, what we've talked about on this show and other places. Something's been off with Sean Tucker this year. Now, I know he's been hurt, but he's 100% healthy now. I asked Dino Babers straight up this week if he's coaching around an injury, and Dino had a fun response. I'll give him credit for that. He said, well, even if he was hurt, Brent, I wouldn't tell you, but I can say this. He's 100%, and he's our starting tailback, right? So if Tucker gets more involved, Florida State's run defense is actually worse statistically than Syracuse's, okay? Here's what else I'm not sure about. If Garrett Schrader plays or not, let me pop back to Lucas's question here. Start a 70% Schrader or a 100% Carlos Del Rio Wilson? The answer is a 70% Schrader. This team needs its quarterback back. I like Carlos Del Rio Wilson as a prospect. I think he's got a bright future. He's got a big arm. He's a big dude. He can scramble. I like his moxie and his confidence. He showed up to play. I was not there, but Emily Leiker, who I mentioned earlier, sent me a picture of it. I believe she posted it on Twitter, too, if you want to see it. Carlos showed up at media interviews this week. He had it was like a fake fur coat on. And I like a guy that's got swagger like that. So I think the future's bright for him. But this team needs its quarterback back because Carlos was overthrowing some open receivers last week, and they just need the leadership. They need the scrambling ability, albeit limited right now, more than likely, and just everything that Schrader brings to the table. Final home game for this team coming up, something we'll discuss here in a moment. I actually just posted a story on syracuse.com on some players that we know are leaving, that could be leaving, and that are likely to be leaving. And remember, after this Florida State game, and it's a new tradition under Dino Babers, and I really like that he's implemented this, they do the senior walk around the dome, right? One last lap around the dome, and they interact with fans and a chance to say goodbye to some players, formally, because, you got 3 games left, this one at home, then a bowl game, and then these guys just kind of take off. And with the transfer portal in college sports now, with COVID eligibility rules being weird, some guys take advantage of it, some don't. You don't quite know certain players that could be playing their last game at the Dome Saturday night. I would put Sean Tucker in that category. I would put Mikel Jones in that category. I would put Matthew Bergeron in that category. And I'm not sure about Garrett Williams now, considering the ACL injury that he suffered. I mean, if I had to put money on it, I'd probably say he'll move on, take his chances at the NFL, even with the injury affecting his status. But you don't quite know. And just because a player participates in the lap, if you will, the senior walk, doesn't mean he can't come back. There's players that did it last year that ended up coming back. So like I said, we're in a weird time in college sports. So, just because you see guys out there doesn't necessarily mean they're gone. John Wildhack this week in a couple of radio interviews said there's going to be some juniors out there, and in his words, that won't surprise Syracuse fans. So I think who he's talking about there are guys like Jones, Bergeron, and players that could be moving on because they're going to get drafted. And look, that's a good thing for Syracuse football in the by and large, because you want players getting drafted. You want to be able to tell recruits we had X number of players drafted, particularly if they go high, first or second round, which Bergeron certainly could. He's the best NFL prospect on this team in terms of the opportunity to go high based on the position he plays, and he's just had a spectacular season. But yeah, you want guys getting picked so you can recruit around that. So something to keep an eye on and something to think about with this game. But let me go back to what I was saying about this matchup. So Florida State gets into the rankings. They almost flipped the script with Syracuse. A few weeks ago, Syracuse is the ranked team on a roll. Florida State's out of the poll. Now Florida State's in the poll, barely. They're number 25 in the country, but they're ranked. And they're on a roll. But the last 2 weeks, they have played Miami and Georgia Tech. Miami's falling apart, injuries piling up, and Florida State got to play their backup quarterback. Same thing with Georgia Tech the week before that. Prior to those 2 games, Florida State lost 3 in a row to ranked or good teams. Now, there's a couple of games in there they could have won. They were close with Clemson. They frankly should have beaten NC State. That was a 19-17 game, and they lost to Wake Forest. So Florida State's vulnerable. Florida State's not coming in here as, a team that Syracuse can't match up with, right? Clemson and Notre Dame, now they were in the Clemson game to the fourth quarter, but it was apparent how much more physical that team was. Certainly Notre Dame just bowled over Syracuse. Syracuse should have beat Pittsburgh last week by all accounts. And we talked well about that in the post-game show, and, no use rehashing that at this point. But I still don't know what to make of this game. I don't know how healthy Schrader is. I don't know if Syracuse can stop the run. I mean, frankly, they haven't been able to the last 3 weeks. So what's going to make me say this is the week they step up and stop the run against a team that's 17th in the country, running the football, number 1 in the ACC, running the football? Jared Verse, remember him from Albany a year ago? Based on that film and how he played against Syracuse, Florida State went after him hard in the transfer portal, and now that kid could be a top 10 draft pick in 2023. So look, Florida State's always got speed. They always have dudes, but Syracuse almost beat this team a year ago. If it wasn't for a bogus non-call, Syracuse clearly should have gotten a holding call at the end of that game last year. They would have beat Florida State. They can beat this team on Saturday. Florida State's a 5-6 point favorite, depending on which, for entertainment purposes, only service you look at this point, right? But it's a weird game. It's a toss-up game. It's a game Syracuse needs. They got to get off the schneid. They got to win. This would be their 6th home win. So they would go 6-1 at the Dome this year if they can win this game. And then you go into your final 2 games, Wake Forest and Boston College. Boston College is a team Syracuse should certainly beat. Wake Forest is a team they can beat, as good as Sam Hartman is and as good as that team has been. I feel like that's a game Syracuse can win. But they've just come up short in so many ways the past couple of weeks. They got pushed around. Their quarterback situation has been, iffy at best. It was brought up earlier by Jim in the comments here about not giving Sean Tucker the football, which I don't understand. The Clemson game was a criminal misuse of Sean Tucker, and he only gets 10 carries against Pitt. I mean, what in the world are we doing here, right? And we talked about it on the post-game show, and I don't want to relitigate the Pitt game, but in general, why in the world would you only give him the ball 10 times? They only had 48 offensive plays in that game. And, Dino tried to spin the numbers earlier this week at his press conference. Well, he had 1/3 of our offensive plays and yada, yada, yada. Just stop. I mean, you only had 48 offensive plays. You got to give the ball more to your workhorse, especially with a backup quarterback in the game. No matter who the quarterback is this week, for the love of Pete, can we please see Tucker get 18 to 20 carries like he deserves in this game, right? Jim notes it here. Can the struggling offensive line create gaps for Tucker? Perhaps a big game for him, 150 plus and 2 touchdowns. I think he can, and I think the offensive line can. We mentioned Florida State certainly got some dudes on that defensive line, but I feel like Syracuse can get back at it this week. The crowd is probably going to be somewhere in the upper 30s, low 40s. I looked today. A lot of tickets still available to this game. The crowds have been great no matter what the crowd size has been. But think about what we're talking about just a couple of weeks ago, back-to-back sellouts, and the fever pitch was high. Lose 3 in a row, it pokes a little hole in that balloon. And people are now kind of wondering what kind of team this is. So I think there's a lot of pride on the line. I think the crowd's going to be great. I think that no matter who the quarterback is, you're going to see a more active offense. We started to see other receivers get involved in the offense last week. Pitt finally did something in terms of what other teams have not been able to. They shut down Arondé Gadsden. It was the first time all year that he has been completely shut down. I mean, he went from, 7-8 catches a game, around 80, 90 yards a game, to nothing. They completely shut him out of that game. And that's hard to do because a lot of teams, a lot of good defenses have not been able to do that. So I would anticipate he gets back in the flow, but it's important to get other receivers in the flow of the game this week too. The defense is hurting. Injuries are piling up. Jatius Gear was the latest notable player that went off the field last week. I expect him to play this week, but a lot of owies on this team, right? And Syracuse, everybody deals with it, though. That war of attrition that football is. Dino's got to prove he can win games in November. He's got a terrible record in the month of November. It's 5-18, if I'm not mistaken, right around there in the month of November. So a lot of this game is just, X factors. A lot of this game is just, intangibles, emotion, playing with pride, being creative, bouncing back, finding confidence, for a team that's lacked it, particularly in the last 2 weeks. Clemson game they almost had, but Notre Dame and Pitt just completely controlled those games. And this team's got to find its mojo again. A couple more from you guys. Always appreciate the great commentary here. Lucas says, let's make it a bad week for Florida State. Their basketball team lost to Stetson, so why can't we beat them in football? I don't know if you guys saw that earlier this week. Stetson beat Florida State by 9 at home in the wonderful world of college basketball, which we'll get to here shortly and is now back in our lives. But Rob says, I'd love to see everyone healthy and ready to play against Florida State in a highly winnable game. I don't know how prepared Schrader would be to defend himself as he could prior to the injury, especially if Kalen Ellis isn't able to play. Another great point there from Rob. The offensive line, not only, as we brought up earlier, can they open up some holes for Tucker, they're a little banged up at this point, but everybody's got owies and injuries at this point, so I don't think Syracuse can lean on that as an excuse. There's Allison saying with Schrader, Aronde Gatson should be targeted more accurately, right? Dennis jumps in and says, can't be mad at this football team with all those injuries this year. Yeah, I understand what you're saying there, but everybody's got injuries, right? I at this point, I don't know how much you can factor that in. It should be mentioned, respectfully, you can say that, but everybody plays through owies and injuries at this point, right? If Gatson covered, quarterback needs to look at prime target, but first keep looking for the open man, as Andrew says there. Yeah, that's what I hope to see. I hope to see some more. Look, it's a good problem to have with Gatson because the dude just gets open, right? If he gets open, you got to get him the football because he gets yards after the catch, right? But it'd be good to see a little bit more involvement with, Cooper, with DeMarcus Adams, with Alford, who seems to have a big catching game. You know who I'd love to see get involved more is Trevor Pena. I think Trevor Pena in that short yardage game, the swing passes, kind of reminds me of like a Brisley Esteem back in the day. And oh boy, who's the guy that Eric Dungy used to throw to a lot? His name's right on the tip of my tongue. Like a Dante Strickland type, right? Somebody who's right there in the flat, get him the ball, let him water bug his way around the field. I'd love to see him get a little bit more involved this week, right? Sean Riley is another good one, right, Rob? Good example there. So you guys can keep chiming in on football here in the comments here, but let's transition a little bit to some basketball talk because we've seen a real game with this team. And we talked about it on postgame Monday night, but just to kind of circle back on it a little bit, it's going to be a very intriguing team to watch. And there's a player that just pops off the screen for me, and that's Judah Mintz. Judah Mintz, who had 16 points in this game. Now, your veteran stood up, Jesse Edwards, who frankly should have had a big game against Lehigh. They didn't have anybody even on stilts that could have guarded that dude. And he had, 18 points, 11 rebounds, 3 block shots. Got to take advantage of that. Jesse 2.0, Jesse at the next level is where this offense is going to just thrive when they run the offense through him. So I expected that. Certainly expected Joe Girard to have the points that he did. And look, Syracuse doesn't have a volume of three-point shooters this year. It's nowhere near what it was last year when you had Buddy and you had Cole Swider and you had Jimmy could hit threes and just a bunch of guys that could go out there and shoot threes. Syracuse set a record for three-point shooting last year, and they finished with a losing record. So it didn't really affect them in that way. It's efficiency shooting the three. Like in this particular game, Girard had a bulk of your threes. He had 4 out of Syracuse's. I believe they had 7 threes in that game. That's what you need, the efficiency to be there, right? We saw man-to-man defense in both halves, which makes a lot of sense for this team. It's weird. It's going to take some getting used to for sure. But we saw it. It just makes sense with the way the teams attacked the zone last year, just bombing threes against Syracuse, which wasn't uncommon, but it was like to the nth degree last year. And look, there's some length and some athleticism, and frankly, they're green playing the zone. It really helps in the zone when you have experience there, and there's just not enough experienced guys in the lineup at any particular time to make that a cohesive zone unit. So I like that they're implementing man-to-man. I just got to get used to it because it's freaking weird watching Syracuse play man-to-man defense, right? So all those things popped. Jim Boeheim went 9 deep, and I think 13 guys got in ultimately against Lehigh. No drama, just a team that you should beat, that they did beat. Colgate comes to the Dome next, and they beat Syracuse last year. Per what I said a moment ago, the volume, just the sheer blitz of three-point shooting that teams put up last year, that was Colgate. Colgate came in, they hit their threes. Syracuse couldn't play defense to save their life. And Colgate wins 100-85. First time they had beaten Syracuse since I believe Kennedy was president, right? So they'll have that on their minds for sure, even though a bunch of the guys that lost that game have since moved on. First big test to see, okay, how does Syracuse handle a good team, a Colgate team that could certainly make the tournament and has just been terrific these past few years, have made the tournament a couple of times, have beaten some teams, Syracuse included, and just no longer the bye game. I mean, you brought it up earlier. Stetson beat Florida State this week. So you just really can't take anybody for granted anymore in college basketball. But of all the things that we've talked about with this team, I'm just so intrigued by Judah Mintz because this kid's got moxie. What he lacks in experience, he more than makes up for in confidence. He can take it to the rack. He's an offensive-minded point guard, which is good and bad because you need a guy to distribute. You need a guy to know when it's time to be the quarterback and distribute the football, as opposed to being the quarterback that takes off and runs himself, when he pulls a Garrett Schrader, essentially, and calls his own number. So I think they've got to get used to that. But having Joe at the 2 is huge. Slowly but surely, they're getting guys like Malik Brown involved, like Justin Taylor involved, Chris Bell, who Jim Boeheim was pretty hard on in his press conference on Monday. Stunner. Jim Boeheim called out some players in his press conference. Benny Williams seems to be the early candidate to be in Jim Boeheim's doghouse earlier in the year. There's always one guy that seems to annoy Boeheim if he's not living up to what he needs to be. Look, Benny's got to step up this year, second-year guy. They need him to rebound, to score inside, and kind of decide what kind of player he is. So it's only one game. Nobody's getting off the moon here quite yet. But Boeheim had some pretty strong comments about Benny in that press conference. And he's the fourth piece to the puzzle in terms of experience, right? Because you have Jesse, you have Joe. Symir Torrance has been terrific in exhibition play. He had 10 points on Monday. And you need Benny to be a stabilizing force out there so you're not leaning too much on your young guys, right? So all told, everything looked pretty good for the Orange with a couple of nitpicks and a couple of things to keep an eye on when they play better teams. And that starts Tuesday night when Colgate comes in. Congratulations to Felicia Leggett-Jack. Got her first win as Syracuse women's basketball head coach. And there's 2 players that are going to lead the charge for this team. And they led the charge when Syracuse won the other night, beating Stony Brook. We're speaking here on Thursday. So their next game is tonight, as a matter of fact. The women's team is going to host Colgate at the Dome. So we'll see how they do in game 2 here. But Daisha Fair with 20 points. Tisha Hyman had 18 points the other night. That backcourt is as good as it gets in the ACC. That is something that Syracuse will have to take advantage of, and that's how they're going to win games. When those 2 are leading the way, there's a ton of guards on this team. There's only 5 forwards on this team. And I talked to Felicia weekly on the radio, and I like how she put this. We'll see how it factors in when they play some better teams and some teams that have size. But she says, we don't look at it in terms of positions. We just put the best players out there, right? But this is a team that's got to score. It's going to pop a lot of threes. It's going to push the ball, and it's going to be a team that is going to have to outrun people because they just don't have the size. They don't. I mean, I think to when Camila Cardoso was here a couple of years ago, Emily Angsler is a player who could, really mix it up, get in there, grab some rebounds, could shoot, goes to Louisville, wins a national championship there. They don't have that type of player on this team, at least that I've seen yet. I'd love to be proven wrong on that. It's a lot of guards, but they're going to be fun to watch. And Felicia grabbed the mic after the game and said, I'm paraphrasing what she said, but it's basically like, hey, this is how we're going to play. We need you here. She wants some bigger and more enthusiastic crowds at the Dome. And look, people have really been, how can I put this? Transformed is the word that comes to mind. And she has a culture to build there. It's not just rebuilding a team. Like Jim Boeheim took on a team this year that had a losing record last year. And he's just kind of getting under the hood, replacing things mechanically. Felicia Leggett-Jack's got to build the whole car. Like she's got to reestablish an entire culture of Syracuse women's basketball after what Coach Q did and just kind of a weird in-between season last year with Vaughn Reed at the helm, and everybody knew they were just kind of in basketball purgatory until Felicia came in, and she did. And she's a breath of fresh air. She's so energetic. She knows basketball. She's been successful at pretty much every stop she's had. Indiana was kind of a blip there, but she brought a Buffalo program to consistency, NCAA tournament berths, and just a model program in the MAC conference, and now gets to come back to her alma mater and do it all here. She's got some talent. I mentioned Daisha Fair, who came in from Buffalo. one of the best point guards in the country. So look, Syracuse is going to be that proverbial team that you don't want to play. Can they win the ACC? Can they be in contention for the tournament? We'll see about that. That's the ultimate goal, right? If Jim and Felicia can get their teams, even at the very least, in the conversation for the NCAA tournament, I think the expectations are a little higher for the men's team. Like, you get the get out of jail free card. You missed the tournament last year, first losing season ever under Boeheim. Like, okay, it happens. First time it's ever happened, but we all know what the expectations are here. And Jim would be the first person to tell you, you make the tournament, right? Somehow, some way, scrap your way in, make the darn tournament, and then everything resets from there. So if both these coaches can get their teams back in the tournament, I think that's all you can really ask for based on the outlook of the rosters and everything that they're rebuilding at this point. But it circles back to Mintz because, boy, we're going to have to be patient with this kid because when he's on his game, he's on his game. But he's going to make some mistakes. He's going to push. He's going to get challenged by better defenses. He's certainly going to turn the ball over. I think you got to get used to more turnovers from the point guard position than usual. But you hope, to steal a reference from Dino Babers, that, they're baking the cake in the right way and patience will pay off in that way. But I'm really excited about what that kid can do. I think he's going to be a heck of a player here and somebody that's going to really electrify that offense. But when he does struggle, you have a guy like Symir Torrance that can just stabilize. Senior, can drive to the rim, can rebound, can defend. And Symir, knock on wood, I guess, he's been hitting his threes. Where'd that come from? You could tell he put a lot of work into his shot in the offseason. So we mentioned it. Syracuse needs that second and third three-point shooter. I think Justin Taylor can eventually get there, but he's just limited in minutes right now. You don't want to lean too hard on a freshman. They just don't have the three-point shooters in volume other than Joe. But if Symir can hit a three or two when you leave him open, all the better for a Syracuse team. Which, by the way, the other thing that stood out on Monday, and we'll see if this continues to be a trend, and Donna DeToda wrote a very good piece about this that I would highly recommend you read on syracuse.com. Warm my heart. Free throws matter, right? Syracuse shot 31 free throws against Lehigh. They had 24 in that game on Monday, and this is a team that's going to get to the free throw line more. Between Mintz driving in, Jesse Edwards obviously is going to get fouled a lot in the paint, a couple of other guys that are more oriented to attack the basket as opposed to take outside shots. So free throws matter, and they're going to matter for this team for sure. As I believe it was Judah who said after the game, it's been a point of emphasis for this Orange team, and not saying it's going to determine how good or bad they are this year, but it's going to be a very important ingredient in the recipe, to say the least. All right, what do you say we end it there for this version of Orange Weekly? Appreciate you guys coming in. Great comments and questions as always. Just a reminder, we pop on here on Thursdays about noon-ish Eastern time if you want to participate live, as we had some great comments from everybody. We'll close on Rob's note here. Things looking great in Louisville either. They lost an exhibition game and then lost to Bellarmine the other night. Ooh, college basketball, man. It's crazy. What does John Rothstein say? It's only November. Craziness already, and we got 4 months to go here, so hang on tight. Saturday is when we'll be with you again on a couple of these same channels for Syracuse Orange football postgame. So if you're watching on the basketball channel, obviously we won't be here for that, but we will be here late night after Syracuse and Florida State. But the beauty of the internet is it might be 6 o'clock where you are, right? So no matter how late it is for us here on the East Coast, we'll be here after Syracuse takes on Florida State Saturday night. It's an 8 o'clock kick, so we'll be approaching midnight by the time we get on and stream and do the thing. But as reminded that if you miss the show live, pops up on Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe there. Facebook page automatically archives. I pop the YouTube version of this show in my recap on syracuse.com, so certainly easy to catch up on the show if you miss it. But that's when we'll be back next time, after Syracuse plays Florida State. In the meantime, you guys enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks for hanging with us here on Orange Weekly, presented by Crouse Health, and we'll talk to you next time.